The sun spilled blood orange across the horizon as a single shot rang out in the dusty main street of Quartz Hill, California. Pearl Jenkins clutched her side, feeling warmth seep between her fingers as she staggered forward 3 steps before collapsing into the dirt. The world tilted sideways, dust filling her nostrils as hoofbeats faded into the distance. Her assailant was long gone, but Pearl remained, bleeding and alone as the evening crowd scattered for safety. The year was 1878, and Quartz Hill was experiencing the growing pains of a town caught between its wild beginnings and civilized aspirations. Pearl had arrived just 3 weeks prior, hoping to escape her past in San Francisco and start anew as the schoolteacher. Now, as she pressed her palm against the bullet wound in her side, she wondered if she'd live long enough to teach a single lesson. Darkness threatened to overtake her vision when the ground trembled beneath her cheek. A horse approached at full gallop and Pearl braced herself, wondering if her attacker had returned to finish what he started. Instead, strong arms slid beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her from the bloodied dirt. "Stay with me, madam," a deep voice commanded as she was cradled against a solid chest. Through half-lidded eyes, she caught sight of a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, concern etched in the lines around striking blue eyes. "I don't think I can," Pearl whispered, her words slurring as consciousness slipped away. "You don't have a choice," the man replied, mounting his horse with her in his arms. "I didn't ride all this way to watch a woman die in the street." The last thing Pearl registered was the steady heartbeat against her ear as the cowboy spurred his horse forward, carrying her away from certain death. Damon Quinn had ridden into Quartz Hill with intentions no more complicated than a hot meal and a night's rest before continuing north to his ranch in the Sierra foothills. He certainly hadn't planned on rescuing a bleeding woman or charging through town with her limp body pressed against him. "Doc Sullivan," he shouted, reining his horse to a stop outside the small building with a faded medical sign. "Doc got an emergency." Damon dismounted with practiced ease, careful not to jostle the unconscious woman in his arms. Blood soaked the side of her dress and her face had gone ashen beneath a spattering of freckles. He kicked at the doctor's door until it swung open, revealing a silver-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Good Lord," Doc Sullivan muttered, stepping aside. "Bring her in. What happened?" "Gunshot," Damon replied, laying the woman on the examination table. "Didn't see who did it. Found her bleeding in the street." "That's Pearl Jenkins," the doctor said, already cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her dress. "New schoolteacher, arrived less than a month ago." Damon removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "Will she make it?" The doctor didn't answer immediately, focused on examining the wound. "Bullet went clean through, that's fortunate, but she's lost a lot of blood." He looked up at Damon. "I'll need help, you staying or going?" Damon glanced toward the door. He had no obligations to this woman Pearl Jenkins, the doctor had called her. Yet something held him in place. Perhaps it was the way her hand had clutched his shirt as he carried her, or maybe just the injustice of a schoolteacher being shot down in the street. "I'll stay," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Tell me what to do." For the next 2 hours, Damon assisted the doctor holding Pearl down when she briefly regained consciousness during the most painful parts of the procedure, fetching hot water and clean linens, and finally helping move her to a recovery bed in the back room. "She needs watching through the night," Doc Sullivan said, washing blood from his hands. "Fever could set in. If it does, it could take her before morning." Damon nodded, pulling a chair beside the bed. "I'll sit with her." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" "No," Damon admitted. "But I found her. Seems right to see it through." Doc Sullivan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "There's coffee on the stove. Help yourself. I'll check back in a few hours." Left alone with the unconscious woman, Damon had time to properly look at her. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins, spreading across the pillow like spilled whiskey. Her face, though pale, bore the marks of someone who smiled often laugh lines at the corners of her mouth and eyes. A schoolteacher, the doctor had said. What was her story? And who would want her dead? As the night deepened, Pearl's breathing grew labored and her skin burned to the touch. The fever had come, just as the doctor warned. Damon bathed her forehead with cool water, speaking in low tones though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Don't you go dying, Miss Jenkins," he murmured. "Seems to me a town like this needs its schoolteacher more than another grave." Near midnight, Pearl's eyes flew open, wild with delirium. "They're coming," she gasped, trying to sit up. "Have to run." "Easy," Damon said, gently pressing her shoulders back to the bed. "You're safe. No one's coming." Her gaze locked onto him, seeing but not recognizing. "Who are you?" "Name's Damon Quinn," he answered. "Found you in the street after you were shot." "Shot," she repeated, confusion clouding her features before recognition dawned. "He found me." "Who found you?" But Pearl's moment of clarity had passed. Her eyes fluttered closed as the fever reclaimed her. Damon continued his vigil, wondering who he might be and what Pearl Jenkins might be running from. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching through the small window. The doctor returned, looking as though he'd barely slept. "How is she?" he asked, placing a hand on Pearl's forehead. "Fever broke about an hour ago," Damon replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "Been sleeping peacefully since." Doc Sullivan checked her pulse and the bandaged wound. "You did good, Mr. Quinn, Damon Quinn." "Well, Mr. Quinn, you likely saved her life twice over. Once bringing her here and again sitting with her through the fever." Damon shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." The doctor's expression suggested he knew better but didn't argue. "She's not out of danger yet, but the worst has passed. She'll need care for a few weeks at least." "I've got a ranch to get back to," Damon said, though he felt strangely reluctant to leave. "Is there someone who can look after her?" "She's been boarding with Widow Perkins, but that's no place for recovery," Doc Sullivan sighed. "I'd keep her here, but with the influenza going around." "I understand," Damon said, though he didn't. He'd done his part. The woman was alive, that should be enough. But as he stood to leave, Pearl's eyes opened clear this time, free of fever's grip. Her gaze found his face and recognition flickered there. "You carried me," she whispered, her voice rough from dryness. Damon awkwardly reached for the water glass, helping her take a sip. "Yes, madam." "Thank you," she said simply, her green eyes holding his for a moment before exhaustion claimed her again. Something in that brief exchange rooted Damon to the spot. He'd been thanked before for breaking horses, for helping at cattle drives, for a dozen ordinary kindnesses. But the naked gratitude in Pearl Jenkins' eyes struck him differently. "There's a room above the general store," he heard himself saying to the doctor. "I'll rent it and have her moved there. Find someone to nurse her during the days. I can check in evenings and nights." Doc Sullivan looked surprised. "That's mighty generous for a stranger." Damon settled his hat on his head. "Let's just say I've got business in town for a while." The truth was, Damon Quinn had no business in Quartz Hill beyond his own curiosity. As he arranged for the room and hired Mrs. Calloway, a local widow with nursing experience, he told himself he was simply being decent. The ranch could wait another week. But as evening fell and he sat beside Pearl's bed in the small room above the general store, he acknowledged there was more to it. Something about this woman and the mystery surrounding her had caught his interest in a way nothing had for years. "Mr. Quinn," Pearl murmured, waking to find him reading by lamplight in the corner. "Still here. Thought someone should keep an eye on you," he replied, closing his book. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot." She attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. "But alive, thanks to you." "Doc Sullivan did the real work," Damon said, bringing her fresh water. "I just provided the transportation." Pearl's fingers brushed his as she took the glass, sending an unexpected jolt through him. "Mrs. Calloway said you've arranged for this room and her care. Why would you do that for a stranger?" It was a fair question, one Damon had been asking himself. "Seemed the right thing to do," he answered, not meeting her eyes. "Besides, I'm curious about who shot you and why." Pearl's expression shuddered. "I didn't see who fired." But you have suspicions, Damon pressed, noting how she averted her gaze. You said something when you were feverish. He found me. Who were you referring to? Delirium, Pearl said quickly. I don't recall saying that. Damon studied her for a long moment. She was hiding something, that much was clear, but he wasn't one to force confidences. Whatever her secrets, she had a right to keep them. Well, he said, standing, when you're ready to talk about it, I'll listen. Until then, rest. I'll be back in the morning. Pearl caught his hand as he turned to leave. Mr. Quinn, Damon, he corrected. Damon, she echoed, the name sounding different in her soft voice. Thank you, truly. He nodded once, suddenly aware of how small her hand felt in his and how long it had been since he'd felt a woman's touch that wasn't paid for. Good night, Miss Jenkins. Pearl, she offered in return, a faint smile touching her lips. After all, you've already seen me at my worst. Damon found himself returning the smile. Good night, Pearl. As he walked to the hotel where he'd taken a room, Damon wondered what he was getting himself into. He had responsibilities waiting cattle to move, fences to mend, hands to pay. Yet here he was, lingering in Quartz Hill because of a schoolteacher with secrets and eyes that seemed to see right through him. For her part, Pearl lay awake long after Damon had gone, troubled by more than her wound. She'd come to Quartz Hill seeking anonymity, a place to disappear. Instead, she'd been found not just by the man she feared, but by this stranger with gentle hands and watchful eyes. She hadn't lied exactly. She hadn't seen the shooter, but she knew who it was all the same. Thomas Blackburn had promised he would find her, and he always kept his promises. The question now was whether she could trust Damon Quinn with the truth. If she did, she might be putting his life at risk as well. If she didn't, she might be facing Blackburn alone when he inevitably returned to finish what he started. Neither option offered much comfort as she drifted back to sleep, the pain in her side a constant reminder of how fragile her new beginning had proven to be. The following week passed in a blur of pain and healing for Pearl. Mrs. Calloway proved to be a competent nurse, if somewhat talkative, keeping Pearl company during daylight hours. But it was the evenings Pearl found herself anticipating, when Damon would arrive with dinner from the hotel restaurant and sit with her, sometimes reading aloud from one of her books, other times simply talking. She learned he owned a cattle ranch about 2 days' ride north, inherited from an uncle 5 years prior. Before that, he'd ridden with various outfits, never staying in one place too long. There was something restless about him, even as he sat still in her room, as though part of him was always scanning the horizon. For his part, Damon discovered Pearl had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a professor. She taught school there until something she was vague about the details prompted her move west. She taught in San Francisco for 2 years before accepting the position in Quartz Hill. Why leave the city for a place like this? Damon asked one evening as they shared an apple pie misses. Calloway had baked. Can't imagine the pay is better. Pearl carefully considered her response. Sometimes a smaller pond offers peace that a larger one can't, she said finally. And sometimes we run from things without realizing we're really running toward something else. And what are you running toward, Pearl Jenkins? He asked, his blue eyes intent. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'll recognize it when I find it. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Then Damon cleared his throat and returned to safer topics. By the end of the week, Pearl was able to move about the room without assistance, though the wound still pulled painfully if she moved too quickly. Doc Sullivan pronounced her recovery remarkable and credited Damon's care, much to his embarrassment. I've barely done anything, he protested when Pearl thanked him again. You've given me time, she said simply. Time to heal without worry, that's no small thing. What she didn't say was that she'd come to depend on his presence, to look forward to the sound of his boots on the stairs each evening. Damon Quinn had become more than her rescuer, he'd become her friend, perhaps the first real friend she'd had in years. Which made what she had to do all the more difficult. I think it's time you return to your ranch, Pearl said on the 10th evening, after Mrs. Calloway had left for the night. "You've already delayed far too long on my account." Damon looked up from the book he'd been reading, surprise evident in his expression. "Are you saying you're tired of my company?" "Of course not," Pearl said quickly. "But you have responsibilities, and I'm well enough now to manage on my own. Mrs. Calloway can continue coming during the day, and I should be able to resume teaching in another week or so." "And what about whoever shot you?" Damon asked, setting the book aside. "They're still out there." Pearl busied herself with straightening the bed covers. "It was probably just a stray bullet from a drunken cowhand. Quartz Hill has its share of rowdy elements after all." "We both know that's not true," Damon said quietly. "Someone deliberately targeted you, Pearl. Why won't you tell me who?" "Because it's not your concern," she replied, more sharply than intended. Seeing his hurt expression, she softened her tone. "Damon, you've done more for me than I could ever repay, but I can't ask you to put your life on hold indefinitely, especially when there's nothing more you can do." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "If that's what you want." "It is," she lied, hating herself for it. Damon stood, reaching for his hat. "Then I'll ride out tomorrow morning," Pearl nodded, fighting the urge to call back her words. This was for the best for him, if not for her. "I wish you safe travels. And I wish you'd trust me," he said, pausing at the door. "Whatever trouble you're in, Pearl, facing it alone won't make it easier." "Some burdens aren't meant to be shared," she replied softly. Damon shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. The heaviest burdens are exactly the ones we shouldn't carry alone." With that, he left, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Pearl listened until she couldn't hear them anymore, then allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall. She'd grown too comfortable, too reliant on Damon's steady presence. It was better this way, she told herself. Better to cut ties now before Thomas Blackburn returned and caught Damon in the crossfire. But as she lay in bed that night, Pearl couldn't ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. For 10 days, she'd felt safe for the first time in years. Tomorrow, that safety would ride away with Damon Quinn, leaving her alone to face whatever came next. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Pearl had slept poorly, haunted by dreams of gunshots and falling, of reaching for a hand that was no longer there. She rose early, dressing carefully to avoid pulling at her healing wound. If this was to be her last morning with Damon, she wanted to at least see him off properly. A knock at her door came earlier than expected. Pearl opened it to find not Damon but the town sheriff, Frank Cooper, hat in hand. "Miss Jenkins," he greeted her, nodding. "Good to see you up and about. Mind if I come in? Got some questions need asking." Pearl stepped aside, apprehension knotting her stomach. "Of course, Sheriff. What can I help you with?" Sheriff Cooper entered, declining her offer of coffee. "Been meaning to talk to you about the shooting, but Doc Sullivan said to wait till you were stronger. Figure that time's about now." "I'm afraid I can't tell you much," Pearl said, gesturing for him to sit at the small table. "I didn't see who fired the shot." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed, settling his bulk in the chair. "But I reckon you might have an idea why someone would want to put a bullet in a schoolteacher." Before Pearl could formulate a response, footsteps sounded on the stairs and Damon appeared in the open doorway. He looked between Pearl and the sheriff, expression guarded. "Sheriff," he acknowledged. "Everything all right here?" "Just asking Miss Jenkins some questions about her unfortunate incident," Cooper replied. "You heading out today, Quinn?" "That was the plan," Damon said, glancing at Pearl. Sheriff Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "Might want to delay that ride a bit." "Got a telegram yesterday I think Miss Jenkins should hear about." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "From the sheriff in Sacramento, responding to my inquiry about the shooting. Seems there's a man named Thomas Blackburn who's been looking for a woman matching your description, Pearl. Says you stole something valuable from him." Pearl felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Pearl didn't steal anything," Damon said, moving to stand beside her, "and she doesn't know any Thomas Blackburn." "I didn't say she did," Cooper replied mildly. Just passing along information, though her reaction suggests otherwise. Pearl swallowed hard, knowing the moment for truths had arrived. I know Thomas Blackburn, she admitted quietly. And yes, he would consider me a thief, though what I took wasn't rightfully his to begin with. Damon's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a silent gesture of support that nearly undid her. Want to tell me what's going on? Sheriff Cooper asked. Because if there's a man out there gunning for one of my townsfolk, I'd like to know why. Pearl took a deep breath, feeling Damon's steady presence beside her. Thomas Blackburn was a banker in San Francisco. I worked as a teacher at a school for girls where his daughter was a student. I discovered he was embezzling from the school's endowment fund money meant to educate orphaned girls. And you reported him, Cooper guessed. I tried, Pearl said bitterly. But Blackburn has powerful friends. Instead of investigating him, they questioned my character. I was dismissed from my position. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. The theft, Damon concluded. Pearl nodded. I took his ledger, the one with all his transactions recorded, including the embezzlement. I sent copies to several newspapers before leaving San Francisco. The story broke 2 weeks after I arrived here. And now he's tracked you down, Sheriff Cooper said, understanding dawning. He wasn't just trying to recover his property, he was trying to silence you permanently. Yes, Pearl whispered, and he won't stop until he succeeds. Damon's hand tightened at her waist. You're not facing this alone. I can't ask you to put yourself in danger for me, Pearl protested. You're not asking, Damon replied firmly. I'm offering. Sheriff Cooper cleared his throat. Well, this changes things. If Blackburn's behind the shooting, he's wanted for attempted murder now, not just financial crimes. I'll wire Sacramento with what we know. It won't matter, Pearl said, shaking her head. He'll deny it. There were no witnesses. Maybe not, the sheriff allowed. But a man like that on the run tends to make mistakes, and when he does, we'll be ready. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. In the meantime, Miss Jenkins, I suggest you not be alone. If Blackburn's still in the area, he might try again. After the sheriff left, silence fell between Pearl and Damon. She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes, ashamed of her deception. I'm sorry, she said finally. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Yes, you should have, Damon agreed, his voice surprisingly gentle. But I understand why you didn't. Pearl looked up at him then. How can you? I lied to you after everything you've done. Because I recognize fear when I see it, he said simply. And you were afraid not just of Blackburn, but of dragging anyone else into your troubles. I still am, Pearl admitted. Damon, you should go. Your ranch can wait, he interrupted. My foreman's handled longer absences than this. Right now, making sure you're safe is more important. Why? Pearl asked, needing to understand. Why is my safety so important to you? We barely know each other. Damon considered her question, his blue eyes intent on hers. Maybe because from the moment I picked you up off that street, something changed for me. I've spent 5 years on that ranch, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Then suddenly there you were, bleeding but fighting, and I remembered what it felt like to care about someone more than myself. Pearl's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything, Damon replied. Just stop trying to send me away. A small smile touched her lips. Is that an order, Mr. Quinn? More like a request, Miss Jenkins, he returned, the corner of his mouth lifting. One I hope you'll grant. I suppose I could use a friend right now, Pearl conceded. Damon's expression suggested he might have more than friendship in mind, but he simply nodded. Then it's settled. I'm staying until this Blackburn business is resolved one way or another. Pearl should have protested further, should have insisted he return to his life and leave her to face her problems alone. Instead, she found herself reaching for his hand, taking comfort in the strength of his fingers as they closed around hers. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me yet, Damon warned. This isn't over. No, Pearl thought as she looked into his determined face. It wasn't over, not the danger from Blackburn, nor whatever was beginning between her and this unexpected protector. Where it would lead, she couldn't say. But for the first time since the shooting, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. The next day brought changes to Pearl's routine. Sheriff Cooper had arranged for a deputy to keep watch on the street outside the general store, and Mrs. Calloway now brought her husband along when she came to help Pearl with daily tasks. Damon had taken a room at the hotel across the street, close enough to respond quickly if needed, but far enough to maintain propriety. "You can't all guard me forever," Pearl pointed out as they shared lunch in her room. "Sooner or later, life must return to normal. Normal can wait until Blackburn is caught," Damon replied, cutting a slice of apple with his pocket knife. Pearl accepted the offered fruit. "And if he's not caught?" "If he's fled back to San Francisco, then we'll know in time," Damon said. "Sheriff Cooper has men watching the roads and checking with stagecoach drivers. If Blackburn's still around, we'll find him." "And if he's not?" Pearl pressed. "Will you spend the rest of your life watching over me, neglecting your ranch and your future?" Damon's gaze held her steadily. Would that be so terrible? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Pearl looked away first, flustered by the intensity in his eyes. "I start teaching again next Monday," she said, changing the subject. "The school board has been very understanding about my accident." "I'll escort you," Damon said immediately. "The schoolhouse is exposed, sitting at the edge of town like it does." Pearl wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but the memory of pain blooming in her side kept her silent. Instead, she nodded. "That would be kind of you." Their days fell into a pattern. Mornings began with Damon arriving at her door, breakfast in hand. They would eat together while planning the day ahead. If Pearl needed to go out to the mercantile for supplies, to the post office, to meet with school board members, Damon accompanied her. A silent, watchful presence that somehow managed to be both reassuring and disquieting. Disquieting because Pearl found herself increasingly aware of him, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the quiet strength in his hands, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She told herself it was natural to develop feelings for the man who had saved her life, who continued to protect her. Gratitude, nothing more. But in the evenings, when he read aloud from one of her books, his deep voice bringing the words to life, or when their fingers accidentally brushed as they reached for the same object, the flutter in her chest suggested something deeper than gratitude was taking root. For his part, Damon seemed content with their arrangement, though Pearl occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Longing, perhaps, or concern, sometimes both. A week passed without incident, then another. Pearl began teaching again, finding joy in the eager faces of her students, despite the anxiety that plagued her each time she walked to and from the schoolhouse. Damon was always there, waiting, no matter how she insisted he needn't waste his days standing guard. "Not a waste if it keeps you safe," he'd say, falling into step beside her as they walked back to town. It was during one such walk, nearly 3 weeks after the shooting, that Pearl finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Don't you miss it? Your ranch, I mean." Damon considered before answering. Parts of it, the quiet mornings, the work that leaves you tired in a good way, the feeling of building something lasting. "Then why stay here?" Pearl pressed. "Sheriff Cooper believes Blackburn has moved on. There's been no sign of him." "Because he might come back," Damon said simply. "And because I'm not ready to leave." "Not ready to leave Quartz Hill, or not ready to leave me?" Pearl asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Damon stopped walking, turning to face her on the dusty path. "Is there a difference?" Pearl felt heat rise in her cheeks under his steady gaze. "There should be. Your life is waiting for you, Damon. I can't keep you from it indefinitely." "My life," he said quietly, "has felt more like living these past weeks than in the 5 years before I found you." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. What if I don't want to go back to the way things were? Pearl's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? Before Damon could answer, a gunshot cracked the air. Pearl felt Damon's body slam into hers, driving her to the ground as a bullet whizzed overhead. Pain exploded through her healing wound as she hit the dirt, Damon's weight pressing her down. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver as he rolled off her, scanning the trees that lined the path. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt inches from Damon's boot. He returned fire, aiming toward a flash of movement among the pines. Pearl lay frozen, terror paralyzing her limbs as memories of the first shooting flooded back. "Can you move?" Damon asked urgently, keeping his body between her and the direction of the shots. Pearl nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, I think so. We need to get to cover. That boulder there," he indicated with a nod. "On my mark, run, don't stop, don't look back. Ready." Pearl gathered her legs under her, ignoring the protest from her side. "Ready." "Now," Damon fired twice in rapid succession, providing cover as Pearl scrambled toward the large rock formation 10 yards away. She heard another shot, felt something tug at her skirt, but kept moving until she reached the safety of the boulder. Damon was right behind her, pressing her against the rock as bullets pinged off the stone. "Blackburn?" Pearl gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Most likely," Damon agreed grimly. He must have been watching, waiting for an opportunity. The shooting stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by Pearl's ragged breathing and the distant call of birds startled by the gunfire. "We're pinned down," Damon muttered, peering cautiously around the edge of the boulder. "He's got the high ground in those trees." "What do we do?" Pearl whispered. "Wait," Damon decided. "Someone will have heard the shots. Sheriff Cooper will come investigating." But as minutes stretched on with no sign of help, Pearl's fear grew. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the path. Soon it would be dark, and their position would become even more vulnerable. "I should go," Pearl said suddenly. "Draw him away from you. It's me he wants." Damon's hand closed around her wrist, his grip like iron. "Not a chance." "We stay together." "But no," Damon cut her off, his voice brooking no argument. "I didn't pull you from that street just to watch you sacrifice yourself now." Pearl felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his face. "I never meant for you to be in danger because of me." Damon's expression softened. "Pearl," the crack of another gunshot interrupted whatever he had been about to say. But this one came from a different direction, followed by a cry of pain from the trees where their attacker had been positioned. "Quinn," Sheriff Cooper's voice called out, "you folks all right?" "We're here," Damon shouted back, relief evident in his voice. "Behind the boulder." Moments later, the sheriff appeared on the path, rifle in hand. "Got him," he announced. "Winged him, at least. Deputies tracking him now." Damon helped Pearl to her feet, keeping an arm around her waist as they emerged from their shelter. "You're sure it was Blackburn?" "Matches the description," Cooper confirmed. "Well-dressed city man, not your typical outlaw." He turned to Pearl. "You all right, Miss Jenkins? You're looking pale." "Just shaken," she assured him, though in truth her side ached fiercely where her wound had been jarred in the fall. "Let's get you back to town," Damon said, concern evident in his voice. "Doc Sullivan should take a look at you." The return to Quartz Hill was tense, all three alert for any sign of danger. But they reached the doctor's office without incident, where Sullivan confirmed Pearl's wound hadn't reopened, merely been bruised in the fall. "You were lucky," he told them as he applied a fresh bandage. Again, luck, Pearl thought as they left the doctor's office. Was it luck that had brought Damon Quinn to her that first night, that had kept him in Quartz Hill, despite her attempts to send him away? Or was it something else, something that felt uncomfortably like fate? Sheriff Cooper left them at the stairs to Pearl's room, promising to let them know as soon as his deputy returned. "In the meantime, stay alert. Blackburn's wounded, which makes him more dangerous, not less." As Pearl unlocked her door, she felt weariness settle over her like a heavy blanket. The fear and adrenaline of the afternoon had drained her completely. Damon followed her inside, checking the small space before relaxing his vigilance slightly. "You should rest," he said, noting her exhaustion. Pearl sank into a chair, too tired to argue. "Will you stay, just until we know for sure?" Damon nodded, pulling the other chair close to hers. "I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a while, the events of the day settling between them. Pearl found herself studying Damon's profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his eyebrow, the weariness that matched her own etched in the corners of his eyes. "You could have been killed today," she said finally. "Because of me." Damon turned to face her. "So could you? That's not on you, Pearl, it's on Blackburn." "But if I hadn't..." "Stop," Damon interrupted gently. "You did what was right, exposing his crimes. The consequences of that, they're not your burden to carry alone." Pearl shook her head, unconvinced. "I dragged you into this. You should be safely on your ranch, not dodging bullets on my account." "Is that really what you think?" Damon asked, leaning forward. "That I'm here out of some misplaced sense of obligation, aren't you?" Damon's laugh held no humor. "Pearl Jenkins, for a schoolteacher, you can be remarkably blind sometimes." Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. His eyes asked a question, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Pearl found herself leaning into his touch, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Damon's lips met hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His kiss was like the man himself, steady, strong, without pretense. Pearl's hands found their way to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened, carrying them both somewhere neither had expected to go when this journey began. When they finally broke apart, Pearl kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the feeling of rightness that had settled in her chest, displacing the fear that had lived there for so long. "That," Damon said softly, his forehead resting against hers, "is why I stayed. Not obligation, not duty." "You, Pearl? Just you?" Pearl opened her eyes to find him watching her, vulnerability plain in his gaze. This strong, capable man who had saved her life and guarded her safety was now laying his heart bare, trusting her not to wound it. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her, echoing his words from days before. "I just needed you to understand." But Pearl found she did have something to say, words that had been forming in her heart even as she tried to deny them. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she admitted, the confession both terrifying and freeing. "And it frightens me more than Blackburn ever could." Damon's smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness she'd noted earlier. "Why does it frighten you?" "Because I came here to start over, to be independent," Pearl explained. "I never expected to find someone I couldn't bear to lose." "Who says loving someone means losing your independence?" Damon asked, taking her hands in his. "The right kind of love doesn't diminish you, Pearl. It makes you more of who you truly are." Pearl wanted desperately to believe him. After all she'd been through, the dismissal from her position, the flight from San Francisco, the shooting, the idea that she might find not just safety but love in this dusty frontier town seemed almost too much to hope for. A sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. Damon was on his feet instantly, hand going to his revolver as he moved to answer it. "Sheriff," he greeted Cooper, relaxing slightly as he opened the door. "Any news?" Cooper looked grim. "Deputy tracked Blackburn to the edge of town but lost the trail when it got dark. Blood sign suggests he's wounded bad, though." "So he's still out there," Pearl said, joining them at the door. "For now," Cooper agreed. "But he won't get far, not with a bullet in him. I've got men watching all the roads in the stagecoach office. He tries to leave, we'll know." "What do you suggest in the meantime?" Damon asked. The sheriff considered for a moment. "Miss Jenkins shouldn't stay here alone. Too exposed, too easy to access from the street. My wife would be happy to put her up at our place." "No," Pearl interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't put anyone else at risk. Your wife, your home. I couldn't bear it if something happened." "She won't be alone," Damon said firmly. "I'll stay with her." Sheriff Cooper raised an eyebrow, glancing between them. That might raise some eyebrows in town, Quinn. I'll sleep in the chair, Damon replied evenly, but I'm not leaving her unprotected, propriety be damned. Pearl felt warmth bloom in her chest at his declaration. I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but I agree with Damon. I feel safer with him here. Cooper seemed unconvinced but nodded. Your choice. I'll have a deputy patrolling the street through the night just in case, and Quinn, he fixed Damon with a stern look. You hear anything suspicious, you fire that revolver. Don't try to be a hero. After the sheriff left, an awkward silence fell between Pearl and Damon. The intimacy of their earlier moment had been broken, replaced by the practical reality of their situation. You don't have to stay, Pearl said finally. The deputy, I'm staying, Damon cut her off gently. Unless you'd rather I didn't, Pearl shook her head. No, I want you here. I just don't want you to feel obligated. Damon crossed to her, taking her hands again. Pearl, when are you going to understand? This isn't obligation, this is choice. My choice. Looking up into his earnest face, Pearl felt something inside her give way, the last wall of resistance she'd built around her heart. Then stay, she said simply. Please. The night passed without incident, though neither slept much. Damon dozed in the chair, waking at every sound while Pearl lay in bed, her mind too active for rest. By morning, they were both exhausted but relieved to have made it through the night. Sheriff Cooper wants us to come to his office, Damon said, returning from a brief excursion to check with the deputy outside. Says he has news. They walked to the sheriff's office together, Damon's hand at Pearl's elbow, both alert for any sign of danger. But the streets of Quartz Hill were quiet in the early morning light, shopkeepers just beginning to open their doors for the day's business. Sheriff Cooper was waiting for them, a telegram in his hand. Got word from the station master at Riverton, he said without preamble. Man matching Blackburn's description boarded the eastbound train last night, paid extra to not have his name recorded. Riverton's 30 miles from here, Damon pointed out. How'd he get there wounded? Stole a horse from the livery on the edge of town, Cooper replied. Found it wandering back this morning, saddle bloody. He looked at Pearl. Looks like your Mr. Blackburn decided to cut his losses and run. Pearl wasn't entirely convinced. He doesn't give up that easily. Maybe not, the sheriff conceded. But with a bullet in him and the law closing in, even a stubborn man knows when he's beat. The telegram says he could barely stay in the saddle when he arrived at Riverton. So it's over, Pearl asked, scarcely daring to believe it could be that simple. Not quite, Cooper said, his expression serious. He's still wanted for attempted murder. I've wired ahead to the next several stops on that train line. With any luck, they'll apprehend him before he gets too far. Damon's hand found Pearl's, squeezing gently. And in the meantime? In the meantime, the sheriff said, Miss Jenkins should be safe enough to return to her normal routine, though I'd still advise caution for a while yet. As they left the sheriff's office, Pearl felt oddly deflated. For weeks, she'd lived with the constant threat of Blackburn's presence. Now that he was gone, at least temporarily, she found herself at a loss. What happens now? She asked Damon as they walked slowly back toward her room. Now, he said, you go back to teaching, I go back to my ranch, life continues. Pearl stopped walking, turning to face him. Is that what you want, to go back to your ranch as if nothing has changed? Damon's eyes held her steadily. I didn't say that. A lot has changed, Pearl, most importantly what I want from life. And what do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You, he said simply. But I won't ask you to leave the life you're building here. That wouldn't be fair. Pearl felt her heart swell with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we figure it out, Damon replied. My ranch is 2 days' ride from here. Not so far that visits would be impossible. We could. See where this leads. It wasn't a proposal, not exactly, but it was an offer, a chance to explore what had begun between them without either having to sacrifice the independence they valued. I'd like that, Pearl said, a smile spreading across her face. Very much. Damon's answering smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. Good, that's, Good, they resumed walking, a new lightness in their steps despite the exhaustion of the long night. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not bound by obligation or circumstance, but by choice. Their choice. The weeks that followed brought changes both subtle and profound. Damon returned to his ranch, but true to his word, he rode to Quartz Hill every other weekend, staying at the hotel across from Pearl's room. Their courtship progressed under the watchful and often approving eyes of the townspeople, who had come to respect both the schoolteacher who had survived an attempt on her life and the rancher who had saved her. Pearl threw herself into her teaching, finding joy in the progress of her students and acceptance in the community that had embraced her. The fear that had shadowed her first months in Quartz Hill receded as news came that Thomas Blackburn had been apprehended in Denver, tried, and sentenced to prison for embezzlement and attempted murder. "It's really over," she told Damon one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," he said, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "You're free, Pearl, free to live the life you choose." Pearl looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her over these months. "And what if the life I choose includes a certain rancher?" Damon stopped walking, turning to face her with hope kindling in his eyes. "Is that what you're choosing?" "I think it might be," Pearl admitted. "If he'll have me." In answer, Damon pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Pearl Jenkins," he said softly, "from the moment I carried you off that street, I think I've been falling in love with you. I just didn't recognize it until later." "When?" she asked, curious. "When did you know?" Damon considered the question. "Maybe that first night, watching you fight through the fever. Or perhaps when you tried to send me away to keep me safe. But I think I truly knew when you stood in that schoolroom on your first day back, facing your students with such courage despite everything that had happened. That's when I realized I didn't want to live without you in my life." Pearl felt tears prick her eyes at the simple honesty of his declaration. "I never expected this you when I came to Quartz Hill. I was running away, not towards something, but somehow I ran straight to where I was meant to be." "With me?" Damon asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "With you," Pearl confirmed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn when Damon formally asked Pearl to marry him, presenting her with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. They were married in the small church in Quartz Hill, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of their schoolteacher to the rancher who had saved her life. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mrs. Calloway sniffed happily at the reception. "When I first helped nurse you, Miss Pearl, Mrs. Quinn, now I should say you looked more dead than alive. And now look at you, radiant as the morning sun." Pearl smiled, glancing across the room to where Damon stood talking with Sheriff Cooper. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "That it does," Mrs. Calloway agreed. "And sometimes, those surprises are exactly what we need, even if we don't know it at the time." Pearl couldn't have said it better herself. From the moment a bullet had struck her down in the street, her life had taken a turn she could never have anticipated. Pain had led to healing, fear to courage, and an unexpected rescue to the kind of love she hadn't dared hope for. As Damon caught her eye across the room, his smile warming her from within, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not in a place, but in a person. The woman who had been left bleeding in the street had found not just safety but joy in the arms of the cowboy who had lifted her and carried her to a future brighter than she could have imagined. Spring came to the Quinn ranch with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Pearl stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Damon worked with a young colt in the corral, his movements confident and gentle as he guided the animal through its paces. 6 months of marriage had brought changes to them both. Pearl had traded her classroom for a different kind of teaching, working with the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders 3 days a week in the small schoolroom Damon had built as a wedding gift. The other days were filled with the rhythms of ranch life gardening, preserving, helping with the endless tasks that kept the cattle operation running smoothly. She had worried, at first, that she might miss the independence of her life in Quartz Hill. Instead, she had discovered a different kind of freedom in partnership with Damon, in building something together that belonged to both of them. As she watched him now, Pearl felt a flutter of movement beneath her hand where it rested on the gentle swell of her stomach. Their child due in late summer was making its presence known with increasing frequency these days. Damon looked up, sensing her gaze, and waved. Pearl waved back, smiling as he said something to his foreman and began walking toward the house. Even now, the sight of him approaching filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "How are my two favorite people this morning?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to kiss her. "We're well," Pearl replied, guiding his hand to her abdomen. "Though your son or daughter seems determined to practice riding skills before even being born." Damon's expression softened as he felt the baby move. "Taking after its mother, strong-willed and determined," Pearl laughed. "I think there's plenty of its father in there too. Stubborn as the day is long." "Stubborn enough to wait for you to admit you loved me," Damon teased, drawing her into his arms. "The best decision I ever made," Pearl said softly, resting her head against his chest. "Even if it took a bullet to bring us together." Damon's arms tightened around her. "Let's hope this little one's path to happiness is less dramatic." Pearl looked up at her husband, at the face that had become as familiar and necessary to her as her own reflection. From wounded schoolteacher to ranch wife and expectant mother, her journey had been unexpected in every way. Yet she wouldn't change a moment of it, not even the pain and fear, for they had led her here, to this man and this life that filled her heart to overflowing. "I love you, Damon Quinn," she said simply. "More than I ever thought possible." Damon's smile was all the answer she needed as he bent to kiss her again, his hand still resting protectively over their growing child. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility, a future neither could have imagined that fateful evening when a woman was left bleeding in the street, and a cowboy lifted her and carried her to safety. But that was the beauty of life, Pearl had learned. Sometimes the most difficult moments led to the greatest joys. Sometimes a single act of courage, whether facing down a criminal or opening one's heart to love, changed everything. And sometimes, when you least expected it, you found yourself exactly where you were meant to be all along. As the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, Pearl and Damon stood together on the porch of the home they had made, bound not by circumstance or obligation, but by a love that had begun in crisis and grown stronger with each passing day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything since that first night together, with courage and unwavering faith in each other. And for Pearl Jenkins Quinn, who had once lain bleeding in the dust of Quartz Hill's Main Street, that was more than enough. It was everything.